Auburn lost. Duke lost. Alabama wins. Clearly, we've got a new number one, right, Andy Patton? Oh, wait. Hold the phone.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
Hey there, what's up? Happy Monday. Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, the only daily national college hoop show out there. We're your hosts. This is Andy Patton. I'm Isaac Schade. You're joining us at the place to get your college hoops every single day. It's all part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I don't know why I said that weird, Andy, but I did. Thanks so much for making us your first listen or watch to kick off the post-NFL season. And we want to remind you, you can catch every episode ad-free on Amazon Music. Special shout out to all the everydayers that are here, and of course, our great Locked On College Basketball Discord community as well. This episode's brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Check it out. Andy, let's timestamp this thing because, you know, it's Super Bowl Sunday as we record. It's like right after the Nebraska-Ohio State game. It's about 2 hours before kickoff of the superb Owl, and so we're looking forward to that. Had another great Saturday game night show last night with Leaf Tulane. I just want to run through quickly the games he covered so you know what you can catch if you go listen to that, because we won't be recovering any of those games. So Florida over Auburn, Clemson over Duke. Duh. Both massive Big East games this week. St. John's over UConn from Friday. Creighton over Marquette. And then Kansas State over Kansas from the Sunflower State, Andy. Yes. Alabama over Arkansas. Michigan State over Oregon. And Texas A&M with that Wade Taylor game winner over Mizzou. So if you want any of that more in depth, go check out Saturday Game Night. Andy, as for our show today, look, we got to recap the lone ranked on ranked game Leaf didn't get to last night because it was late. Texas Tech at Arizona out in the desert. We got some positive injury updates. Teams get dudes back and win convincingly. Mike Woodson versus Dusty May in Indiana. I don't know what their communications department's doing, but it's a doozy. And then we had a whole bunch of other ranked teams that won on the road at unranked. But Andy, here's where we want to start. While we're not going to talk about the Auburn game or the Duke game or the Alabama game directly, what we do want to have a conversation about is who's the new number one in the AP poll today, and less so who it will be and more so who it should be. So to kick this off, as Duke Clemson was ending, which so good to have Dickie V on the call. You could hear just, man, his voice was gravelly and I could hear his struggle, but it was so good to have him. But as that game ended, I forget which of the three of them said it, but I literally went back so I could get the direct quote. The Tigers knock off Duke 77-71. That's your final. And we're going to have a new number one come Monday as Alabama finished off their closer win than expected at Arkansas. Quote, that's it. And Alabama will be the new number one team in college basketball. End quote. Andy Patton, are you convinced about that? Or do you think it should still be Auburn or maybe even Duke or somebody else that we're not even talking about? Who should be the new number one today when the AP poll comes out?
Yeah, I'm not convinced that it should be Alabama. I'm fairly convinced that it will be Alabama based on the history of how AP voters tend to vote and how these things tend to shake out. Teams.
Oh, yes. Do you mean reactionary?
Yes, incredibly reactionary. And we talked about it a little bit kind of before we hit the record button too, of like one of the main things is that there's no specific rules on how to vote in the AP voting. And so some people treat it kind of like power rankings of like, we're voting primarily based on what happened in the last week, with what happened prior to that kind of being secondary almost to the immediate reaction to the previous week. And sometimes it's as simple as voters just saying, you lost, you go down 2, you won, you go up 2, like, and not putting a whole lot more thought into it. I don't think that's the majority of voters, but it's enough of the voters where there's another segment of the voting population who does kind of treat them more like power rankings and says, well, Auburn, only went 1-1 last week and Alabama went 2-0 and, whatever, we're going to treat it that way. And there's also people, myself included, not as an AP voter currently, but who are more likely to look at the big picture and say, well, this team is still the number one team in the country or still number 2 or shouldn't get knocked because of one loss. And that's where I'm at. Auburn still has the best resume in college basketball. analytics sites still view Auburn as a better basketball team than Alabama and Duke. I don't see Auburn losing to Florida, even at home, as enough to knock them down from an Alabama team that is great. There are 3 teams in college basketball. All of them have a case at number 1. They're going to be 1, 2, 3 in whatever order. It is not in any way, shape, or form a knock on Alabama. I think that beating Arkansas, obviously, if they lost that game, it'd be different, but I don't think it'd be that much different even if they blew out Arkansas. It was a close win. They got the W, but to me, Auburn has incredible amount of quad 1 wins. What they have been doing this season is phenomenal. 1 loss to a very, very good Florida team. Again, this conversation's different if they lost to South Carolina, but they didn't. They lost to Florida, like a top 5 team, a team that I think very likely will be 4th in the AP poll when it comes out. So to me, losing to a team that's that good when you've had this kind of resume, no, I don't think you should fall off from being number 1. I still think Auburn's the team to beat in college basketball. And if you're somebody who votes by saying like, hey, like it's a power rankings thing, I think Alabama deserves to be number 1, like fine. But I don't see how you could reasonably make an argument that Auburn is not the team to beat right now in the SEC still, even at this point. And so to me, since I still so firmly believe that, I can't knock them from number 1, even with the loss.
Yeah, absolutely. And by the way, kudos to the Gators. Like Elijah Martin doesn't play in this game. Walter Clayton comes back. Like we knew that even during Friday's show. But Andy, how crazy! Walter Clayton comes back and plays all 40 minutes of this basketball game. Nuts stuff. But yeah, like I love that you said here, like, look, right now, these are clearly the 3 best teams in the nation. We thought Iowa State was in that mix. They've dropped off a little bit with Milan Momcilovic being out. More on that coming up in the next segment. But so, yes, we recognize we're splitting hairs here, but this is a conversation that we and people all over the country love to have. Who's the top dog? And for me, Andy, I'm with you. I'm not just going to react to what happened yesterday for 40 minutes. I want to zoom out and look at your whole resume. And that leads me to clearly still say, as you said, that Auburn would be number 1. And I haven't even really thought through Duke versus Bama for 2, which, sure, that's a longer conversation we could have at another time. But as you said, Ken Pom, Auburn's number 1, Duke 2, Bama 6. Torvik, Auburn 2, Duke 3, Bama 6. In the net when the refreshed on Sunday, same thing as Ken Pom, Auburn 1, Duke 2, Bama 6. Yeah. I went a little deeper on the net, Andy. These 3 teams against top 10 teams in the net. Auburn has played 6 games more than Duke and Bama combined, and they're 4-2 in those games. Duke has played 2. They're 2-0. Great. Bama has played 2, and they're 1-1. So both in terms of sheer number of games against high-level competition and the number of wins. In the quads, literally the number of quad 1 wins that Duke and Alabama have, you combine them together, that's 12. Auburn by themselves has 12 quad 1 wins. And so all of that, Andy, you just look at the resumes.
That to me is the key. That is the key. Quad data is it fluctuates. Obviously, we've talked about that a little bit of like, Houston picked up 2 quad 1 wins in the same day just because other teams happen to win. Like when resumes are very close in the quad, you got to take it with a little bit of a grain of salt. Auburn has literally the same number of quad 1 wins as both these teams combined while having 3 times less losses. Duke and Bama have 6 combined quad 1 losses, 3 for Duke, 3 for Bama. Auburn has 2 total. I mean, it's not even, that's such a huge difference to me that it's really hard to make an argument otherwise. Even if the quad system is flawed, that's a massive difference.
And that's why I dove detailed in on like not just quad wins, but like literally against top 10 in the net, right? Like it's high level wins on top of all of that. So, and Andy, there was, I kind of put this idea out there on Saturday night and somebody pushed back on me in Blue Sky. And I just wanted to mention this. And they said, disagree. You can't lose at home and maintain the number 1 ranking. And I hear what they're saying. I think this is a snapshot in time kind of thing. But to me, I was like, yeah, but big picture, you lost at home, as you said, to like the number 4 or 5 team in the nation in Florida, while Alabama also lost at home this season to an Ole Miss team that is top 25 good, but nowhere near as good as Florida is. And so it's like, that to me is wildly faulty logic by this person that pushed back against me. So, I mean, by your logic, Alabama can't ascend to number one either, nor should anyone else who's lost at home this year. So that's a struggle for me.
Yeah, it's the same thing of like, just because Alabama's loss was a month ago means that they get to be number one now. I'm with you. I don't buy that.
Yeah,
I don't buy
when
that.
you lose, come on.
Yeah, it doesn't make sense to me. But yeah, the great thing about this is the Auburn versus Alabama battle. We still got two matchups. They haven't played each other yet. We don't have that head-to-head data, which is what makes this conversation so compelling. But we will next Saturday in Tuscaloosa, and then 3 Saturdays after that in Auburn to end the season, the regular season. Those are going to be really, really fun games. I'm incredibly excited to see how those two play out.
Yeah, Andy, that's the great news. Is this is all a fun hypothetical conversation, which we love. But man, we're going to find out. And what you just said, Andy, the math's there. That means we only got 4 weeks left in the regular season before before conference tournaments for the high majors. Crazy, crazy stuff. Andy, just very quickly, anybody else that should be considered for 1, 2, 3 right now?
I mean, not really. I think Florida's very close. Florida's only got 3 losses. None of them are bad losses. Their win equity is very good now, especially with that win over Auburn and that huge win, of course, that they got over Tennessee. Florida's close. I think they're fourth for me with Houston in that conversation. Obviously, Iowa State's fallen off a little bit. Even Purdue has kind of climbed into that conversation. But there's a tier gap between those top 3 and everybody else, with Florida being, I think, the team that's closest.
By the way, very quickly, Andy, and then I'll let you transition us. I was looking ahead at Alabama's closing schedule. They have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 more regular season games. 7 of them are against teams that were ranked in the top 25 last week. At Texas versus number 1 Auburn, at number 15 Mizzou versus number 14 Kentucky versus 22 Mississippi State, at number 4 Tennessee versus number 6 Florida, and at number 1 Auburn. That means they close at Tennessee, hosting Florida, at Auburn. Wow. Holy smokes. Good luck, Nate Oates. My thoughts and prayers to you, my man.
Well, folks, Arizona won the rematch against Texas Tech on Saturday. They remain tied with Houston at the top of the Big 12 standings. We're going to talk about that craziness going on in the Big 12 and some injury updates as well. All that coming up in just a second. But first, folks, when the game tips off, the NBA action is just getting started, and there's no better place to get in on it than FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. With FanDuel, you can place live bets throughout the game, so even if you miss the opening tip-off or you want to bet on a fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. It's great because when you win, you get paid instantly. Big Monday coming up tonight, North Carolina at Clemson, 7 p.m. on ESPN. Clemson favored by 5.5. Baylor at Houston, number 5 Cougs. Baylor a chance to really get back into the mix. That game, of course, 2 hours later at 9. Also on ESPN, Houston at home favored by 9. If you like those odds, any of the other odds, check them out on FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, folks, recapping a fun weekend of college basketball. Leaf Tulane on a Locked On College Basketball Game Night show on Saturday night. Check it out if you have not yet. It is in your feeds. He did a recap of a ton of the great action that we saw on Saturday night, but there was a few games he didn't get to. One of them, the most notable game that he didn't touch on, ranked on ranked matchup, Texas Tech at Arizona. We want to talk about that. The Wildcats picking up a W here, 83-72, the final for Tommy Lloyd's club. They did this without Tre Townsend, one of their better players, so a really nice win for this team. A team that kind of started out the season fairly slow. They didn't look great in the non-conference, kind of felt like they weren't going to necessarily have the impact going into conference play that we thought they would. And there was a lot of conversation about this Big 5 teams in the Big 12 with Kansas and Iowa State and Houston and Baylor and Arizona. And Baylor has taken a step back, and Kansas has struggled recently, and Iowa State has now struggled recently. Meanwhile, the two teams tied at the top of the conference, Houston and now Arizona, tied with Houston after beating this Red Raiders team. A really nice balanced scoring effort from this team. Again, no Tre Townsend, but Jaden Bradley and Caleb Love each have 16 in this one. We saw a double-double from Toby Awaka, 14 and 11, kind of stepping up in that absence of Townsend in a really physical game between these two teams. It was a kind of oddly officiated game. I think we don't talk about officials too much, but there were some things that stood out in that game. McCaslin getting a technical foul. It's 2 tees in a row, I think, for McCaslin after getting that tee early in that game when JT
2 Saturdays in a row, at least. Yeah.
Yeah, so he got his money worth in that one. I don't think he got his money's worth in this one necessarily. But yeah, it was an interesting game. A huge win for Arizona. Again, the rematch. The only loss for Arizona right now in conference play was very early to Texas Tech, and now they managed to get a win here against a team that has been playing some really, really good basketball as of late, the Red Raiders. So this was another win to kind of prove that this Arizona team is very legitimate, is a high-level competitor in the Big 12, and has a realistic chance of winning the league in their first season, which would be incredible, especially considering how much they struggled back in November.
You know, it's funny. That would be 2 years in a row that's happened, Andy, because Houston did it last year in their first year in the league. I want to give a little shout out to my sister-in-law, Toby, who's a Texas Tech grad and a big fan. She pointed out to me actually earlier today, Houston, how many losses do they have in the Big 12?
One.
Arizona, how many losses do they have in the Big 12?
One.
Who are those two losses to?
Are they both to? Yeah, you're right. They're both to Texas Tech.
Isn't that funny? So it's like, man, it's just a crazy thing. But then now Texas Tech has 3 losses, so they sit 2 back of both of those teams. So, I mean, that's what we're looking at the top of this conference is they're all capable of beating each other, meaning, Andy, that Kansas City in a couple of weeks for the Big 12 tournament is going to be ridiculous. Yeah. That's what I take away from that. It's funny. You talked about the balanced scoring. For 4 of those 5 guys, it came with them shooting each 60% or better from the field. While our good buddy Caleb Love was the Caleb Love experience, as always, 4 of 15 from the field, 1 of 6 from 3. And he had a moment where he got a little bit spicy on the sideline, right in front of Coach McCaslin. In fact, right in front of where Chris Level sits, our Locked On Texas Tech host, doing his radio stuff. And there was a whole weird moment. And it was like I thought he was more inflamed than what Coach McCaslin was when he eventually got teed up, which here's why I think that technical foul was called or assessed to him, Andy. This game, you know, you mentioned the referees. It was a tough physical game. And yes, that's great. But I thought they let it get a little bit too out of control. And then they started, like, there were some that they would whistle and it didn't make sense. And then there was others that they just let go. And I think at some point, Coach McCaslin was asking for these fouls. And on that particular one that he was called, he was a little more demonstrative, just physically of saying, hey, he got him on the wrist as he went up for the shot. Yeah. And the guy, I don't even remember what ref it was, just very, it was the least like demonstrative tee I've ever seen. And it shouldn't have been called. It's like, no. Don't call it technical, adjudicate the game better, Andy. That was my frustration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the complaint when you let a game get too physical is that players could get hurt, and that happened. Chance McMillian takes an elbow to the top of the head in the closing seconds of that game, and he goes to the locker room. We don't have an update as of right now, unless you do, Isaac. I don't have an update.
I don't.
That would be a huge loss for them. He's been a fantastic player. Ideally, hopefully he's it's not something that causes him to miss any time. I would expect that it probably is not, but you never know. Anything to the head can be a little bit scary. So certainly something to keep an eye on there. JT Toppin was fantastic in this game, 21 and 13. We would be remiss if we did not shout him out. One of those, I feel like a lot of the high profile transfers, there's a lot of conversation about the ones that have not been panning out in certain ways, like the Coleman Hawkins or the Umar Balos or John L. Davis, although he's been much better as of late for Arkansas. But JT Toppin's one that really, really worked. A lot of people said this is going to be a great fit. He's going to be perfect at Texas Tech. He's going to do some really good stuff for Coach McCaslin, and he has. And it's been really fun to watch him adjust from the Mountain West to the Big 12 and playing the way that he has.
Man, yeah, absolutely. Okay, Andy, we talked a little bit ago about Florida and how Walter Clayton was back. He played 40 minutes. They were without Elijah Martin, but the Gators were not the only high-profile team to get an important player back. Both Iowa State and Kentucky get guys back. For Iowa State, it's Milan Momcilovic, who it's been painfully obvious that Iowa State is not the same offensive team in particular without him. They have fallen at KenPom. I was just looking a little bit ago from what were they? They were like top 5, 8, something like that. And now, as we sit here recording Sunday afternoon, they're 17th in offensive efficiency. I think they can get back to where they were, but it's just a sign of how quickly they've dropped offensive efficiency without him. Meanwhile, Kentucky gets back Lamont Butler, arguably their best perimeter defender, maybe at least.
I think so.
And so in doing so, both Iowa State and Kentucky get convincing wins on Saturday. 82-52 for Iowa State over TCU at home. Kentucky 80-57 over South Carolina at home. Andy, neither of those are like high profile opposition. Neither, both teams are at home. I get it, but just so good. As people who love college basketball, to get some of these players back, and then B, so good for these teams to be able to work these guys back in and fix some problems, Andy, that both teams have been having lately.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing is like Iowa State had lost 3 in a row and TCU had been playing pretty well. Like this was not a foregone conclusion that they would win. I expected they were still going to win, but a 30-point win is just a breath of fresh air for a team that had been struggling. And somewhat similarly with Kentucky, they've been struggling 2 in a row, 4 of the last 5. And South Carolina, like we said, they're one of the weaker teams in the conference, but they're still a pretty good basketball team. And so for Kentucky to get a W here, again, convincingly, I think is the key of both these teams kind of get some momentum. They feel better. They get off the schneid and get wins where they don't have to be stressful minutes in the last 10 minutes of the game. So I think, first and foremost, college basketball is better when Momcilovic and Lamont Butler are healthy. And so it's fun to see those two guys back in action and to see these two teams kind of getting some momentum here with about a month until we get to the Selection Sunday.
And going forward, a little bit more of a breather for Iowa State than Kentucky. The Cyclones are at UCF Tuesday. They host Cincinnati next Saturday, and then they host Colorado after that before having to go to Houston. So a little bit of some ramp-up time to get Momcilovic back in. No rest for the weary for Kentucky, though. The Volunteers are coming to Rupp on Tuesday night, Andy. That is going to be insane. Well, folks, Indiana finally made an official statement about Mike Woodson later Friday after Andy and I recorded about him stepping away, but then they wouldn't allow him to talk about it, or he didn't want to talk about it or something post-game on Saturday. Good grief, what's going on there? Anyway, we'll talk Michigan winning at Assembly Hall and 7 other ranked road teams winning on Saturday at unranked teams. All coming up in just a second. Andy, on a day when a couple high-profile teams lost on the road at unranked opponents on Saturday, that would be Duke obviously losing at Clemson, Kansas losing in Manhattan, and then Marquette losing at Creighton. Man, how about the Blue Jays? I left them dead in the water, Andy. Great stuff from them. And Marquette's kind of going the other way. It's like anyway. Those 3 teams lost on the road as ranked teams to unranked opponents, but there were 8 other ranked teams, Andy, on Saturday that won at unranked opponents. Leaf hit Alabama's win at Arkansas on game night last night. But where I want to start us off, Andy, is number 24 Michigan winning at Indiana. Wolverines 70-67. Indiana made it a game late. I think that was kind of a circle the wagons for coach kind of moment, it felt like to me. But just such an odd kind of thing. And Andy, like we'll talk about the game a little bit here, I guess. Indiana gives a push late. Michigan had been up as much as 18. They were still up 17 3 minutes into the second half. Great numbers for Danny Wolf, 29 and 5 assists. Vlad Golden, 18 points, 8 rebounds. Okay, great. But what I really want to talk about is the fact that if you go watch Indiana's press conference, they cut it off, their official one, but from some of the reporters, you can hear, I'm assuming it's the AD or the SID, excuse me, for IU basically saying, hey, we want to talk about the game. Coach is not going to talk about the thing. And then on the other hand, during Dusty May's press conference for Michigan, he's asked about it multiple times and has great answers. Andy, is this a bad look for Indiana, or is this just hey, we're trying to take the attention off of coach and put it on the players in the game? What is your take on that?
What I don't understand is if you didn't want to talk about it, if you didn't want to address it for coach, whether it was Coach Woodson who didn't want to address it, whether it was the administration who didn't want it to be talked about in the presser, why put out a statement and confirm it at all? Like, the reporting had already come out that this would have been discussed, that there was conversations happening. Maybe they felt like they had to put out a statement, but I don't understand why you would do that if you weren't going. Like, it felt to me like when the timing happened on Friday that they were announcing it. First of all, they're doing a Friday afternoon news dump classic. That's what you see that all the time in sports.
It's like 4 Eastern. I went back and looked.
People trying to bury a news story by release, like a Friday afternoon before the Super Bowl is the perfect time to try to bury news, except that they had a pesky game on Saturday. And so they thought, like, maybe if we just announce this on Friday afternoon, people will forget about it by the time Monday rolls around and we just don't have Coach Woodson talk about it. But like, you had to know that was going to create more of a kind of a situation around it. And I know that people don't like when reporters complain about not getting access or not being able to ask certain questions or whatever. I understand that that's kind of a sticky topic, but like, the fans deserve to hear from Coach Woodson about this. Like, this is, and like, again, if he didn't want to talk about it, then you just let the rumors that are out there, the unnamed sources that Norlander and other people have about this, you just let that go for a little bit longer. And then you have Coach Woodson release a statement when he's ready to talk about it, because he's going to have to talk about it at some point. And this isn't Indiana's fault. But like, at some level, they had to know that there was going to be a situation where Dusty was going to get a bunch of questions about it. And the dichotomy of Coach Woodson refusing to talk about his intention to leave the university at the end of the year, a university that has, he's coached at for a long time. He's a very iconic figure in Bloomington. And now he's like not even talking about it when the coach that they, presumably could have hired last year is fielding questions about it and handling them appropriately. Like, they had to know that was going to be
so well. Yes.
happened. And it just, again, that's not Indiana's fault. They couldn't control reporters asking Michigan coach questions, but it just amounted to a not good look here. And like, we've spent a lot of time, Isaac, on the show talking about how coaches have handled their departures. It's been a storyline with Tony Bennett. It was a storyline with Jim Larrañaga. And it wasn't as much of a storyline with Leonard Hamilton, because guess what happened? Leonard Hamilton said, hey, I'm stepping down at the end of the year. I'm going to coach through the year. I'm going to help this program find the person who succeeds me. And yeah, Leonard Hamilton's got the lawsuit and there's other stuff going on. But in terms of how he handled his departure, like, there's a reason it's not continues to be brought up, because that's what you do, is you say, I'm doing this. Here's the plan. Here's when I'm going to do it, etc. And you own up to it. And for this to be the way that Woodson and the Indiana handles a very high profile coaching departure, it just, it speaks to there being some dysfunction in the organization, and probably doesn't make any potential coaches feel any better about going there.
Dude, that is a good word, Andy. I hadn't thought about that angle on it. That is so true. It's like, that's good. I'm trying to think about, like, how would I wish Indiana had handled it? And there's two different things I have thought of, and then we can move on to these other games. But it's like, when they put out the statement, maybe just go ahead and have a press conference with Coach Woodson Friday afternoon. Get out ahead of it and just say, here's what I'm thinking. Here's what we're doing. And I know we said he's not ready to talk about it yet, but if you're going to put out the statement, you gotta, right?
Yeah.
So go ahead, just have a quick press conference, maybe even have him read a statement and whatever it is, and say, hey, I want to get out ahead of this because I want tomorrow to be about the focus on the boys in the game. So get your questions out now. Let's do it Friday, right? Cool. Or if we're going to do it, as you said, just don't put out a statement yet. Let the rumors fly and understand that he's going to be asked about it post game, and let Coach Woodson address it and say, like, even before, like in his opening statement, I would have said, if I were him, I understand that you guys probably have a lot of questions about what's going on right now. I appreciate and I understand you got a job to do. I'm not quite ready to talk about it yet, but I promise you, I'm going to give you the opportunity to do so. Right now, I want to focus on the game and the boys and this team and the effort that they showed. First question, let's go. Right? Yeah. Like, that's all you got to do. All right, Andy, there were 6 other games where ranked teams won at unranked teams. Number 4, Tennessee at OU 70-52. 5, Houston wins at Colorado by 10, 69-59. Wisconsin at Iowa, 74-63. Mississippi State squeaks it out, number 22 at UGA, 76-75. Illinois, number 23 in the nation, wins at Minnesota by 21, 95-74. And Ole Miss, man, I thought they were done for most of this game. I was watching it. Number 25, Ole Miss wins at LSU 72-70. Andy, as you watch those or process through them, anything that stands out about any of those other 6?
Not a ton. I mean, I was surprised that it was only a 10-point win for Houston. They tend to blow out bad teams, and Colorado's the legit worst team in the Big 12, but it's a road game. Road games in Colorado are tough with the air quality there. So I'm not as shocked, but that stood out in terms of the score. I also shout out Illinois they've been struggling lately, and their freshmen had been struggling a little bit. KJ Kasparis, Jakusionis had a rough game against Rutgers. And in this game, their freshmen were phenomenal. Will Riley nearly had a triple-double off the bench, 27 points for him. KJ had 24 points on 8 of 14 shooting. Ivicic had a double-double, 18 and 11 on 8 of 9 shooting. Like, just a really strong performance from the young guns. Yes, Minnesota is not great, but this was still a road game for a struggling Illinois team, a team built up primarily of freshmen, and they went out and got it done in a major way. I was very impressed by this game.
Yeah, dude, that was going to be exactly where I went. Like, Will Riley was back to the Will Riley that we saw earlier this year. And if he's going to be that, like, as you said, they've kind of hit the skids a little bit. But Ivisic had missed a game or two. I can't remember how much it was, but getting him back going healthy, it's just good stuff. I know Brad Underwood has to be pleased with that result, and the rest of the Big Ten has to be like, oh no, that's a thing. Andy, not a ton on Sunday, obviously, because of being Super Bowl Sunday. We did, as we always do, have a couple Big Ten games. Number 18, Maryland holds serve at home against Rutgers, 90-81. Derek Queen, Dairy Queen, man. 29 points, career high, 15 boards, a career high. Also chipped in 5 assists, a block, and a steal. Really, really impressive, and just fun to see him against the Rutgers freshman. Nebraska wins at home 79-71 over Ohio State. Memphis holds serve at home, number 17. Tigers at 90-82 over Temple. And in a mid-tier Big East game, Nova wins over X. Really needed that one, 80-68, to try to keep pace with those top 4 teams that are all playing each other right now, which is still so fun. Love the top of the Big East.
Big Monday, very quickly. We talked about it a little bit in the ad read, but it's going to be a really fun game. A couple of games here. North Carolina at Clemson. Clemson has a chance to defeat Duke and North Carolina in a 3-day span. That is an extraordinary opportunity for Brad Brownell's team. This North Carolina team obviously has not been as good as expected this year. Clemson is favored in that one by 5.5 points. That game, of course, on ESPN at 7 Eastern time, followed by the Big 12 game, Baylor at Houston, battle of some elite programs in Texas. Houston favored by 9.5. Be interesting to see. Baylor struggled on the glass this year, even with Norchad Omier. They just don't have a lot of depth in the front court, and Houston doesn't have a ton of size, but their bigs are phenomenal, physical, tough players. And we've seen Kelvin Sampson's club really dominate teams with that physicality on the glass and just in the front court in general. So Omier versus the Houston Bigs feels like a huge part of this game. But of course, the LJ Cryer impact playing his former team is going to be a big part of this game as well.
Do we know anything about Edgecombe's availability yet?
I have not seen anything on VJ Edgecombe's availability in that game. So that's obviously a huge part of it as well.
Yeah, I was just looking for that. And Jeremy Roach is back going, and with Langston Love as well. I can't remember there. Should be a lot of fun. All right, Andy, Super Bowl time. Who's going to do it? Obviously, as everybody's listening to and watching this, they already know, but come on. It's like an hour till kick.
It's an hour till kick. I think Kansas City's going to take it. I think
I got to go with that too.
Folks, that is going to wrap it up for us today, though. We got a fun couple of big Monday games. And then Tuesday, as it has been all year long, is absolutely loaded. Very excited to recap those games. As we said, we're going to start doing some bubble stuff as well. Talk about who's in, who's out, what some of these matchups potentially mean going forward. But again, wrapping it up for us today. So as always, we want to say apologies to the Lawyer family. Let's go Wild Popes. Cheers to the Mick Bruins. And until Tuesday, peace out.